Good evening. What you're about to hear is not comfort, it's a challenge. We live in a world where comfort has become the goal, but comfort never built anything extraordinary. If your ambition is survival, comfort is enough. If your ambition is impact, it's poison. The world doesn't need more followers of the status quo. It needs more people willing to question everything, to think in first principles. Don't ask, what is the norm? Ask, what is true? What is possible if I start from zero? Every breakthrough that shaped history came from someone who refused to accept the default answer. They looked at impossibility and said, let's re-engineer it. You must do the same, risk of course. Failure inevitable, but if you're not failing, you're not moving fast enough. Stop fearing failure, it's simply feedback. Fail fast, learn faster. When others are sleeping, you should be iterating. When others are doubting, you should be testing. When others are satisfied, you should be launching again. Build not for applause, but for purpose. Build for the human species. If you're spending your time making something meaningful, something that pushes the boundaries of life, as we know it, that's how legacy is created. So if you've got something that keeps you up at night, that doesn't let you settle, go build it. Ignore the noise. Iterate like your future depends on it, because it does. Remember, the future is not something we inherit. It's something we build. Thank you. The things worth doing are often the things no one believes can be done. When something is labeled impossible, that label usually comes not from physics or facts, but from limitations in mindset. Most people operate within the boundaries of what they already know. They look at precedent, at convention, and at consensus. But progress doesn't emerge from consensus. It begins with someone irrational enough to challenge it. Impossible is not a wall, it's a signal. It tells you where to dig. If everyone agrees it can't be done, that's precisely where there's no competition. There's white space, unclaimed opportunity, and room for asymmetric impact. The people who change the world are those who identify that signal and then lean in, not away. To embrace the impossible is to become comfortable with rejection, misunderstanding, and ridicule. It's to walk into a room of experts and say, maybe you're wrong. Not with arrogance, but with clarity. The kind of clarity that comes from thinking from first principles rather than analogies. Conventional thinking says, this didn't work before, so it won't work now. First principles thinking says, what are the physical constraints? What is required to make this work? Can it be made better, cheaper, or more scalable with modern tools? Most people never ask these questions. That's your competitive edge. Pursuing the impossible demands an unusually high tolerance for risk. Risk of money, time, reputation, emotional bandwidth. Most people are trained to minimize risk, but impact scales with risk. If the downside of your idea failing is discomfort, but the upside is reshaping an entire industry or solving a massive human problem, the equation becomes obvious if you're thinking long term. The problem is most people aren't. They optimize for short-term validation, for quarterly rewards, for applause from peers. But when you embrace the impossible, you stop playing for points. You start playing for purpose. Most people wait for permission from institutions, investors, public opinion before they act. You don't need permission to try something no one's ever done before. In fact, if you wait for it, you'll miss your window. The most meaningful endeavors begin when someone chooses to proceed in spite of doubt, not in the absence of it. You have to develop internal conviction so strong that external disbelief becomes irrelevant. It's not that you ignore the critics, it's that you're too focused on engineering the solution to hear them. Technology evolves, tools improve, paradigms shift. What was impossible 5 years ago becomes trivial tomorrow. but only if someone was irrational enough to work on it when no one else would. The smartphone in your hand, the rockets breaking through the atmosphere, the electric vehicles replacing combustion, these things all began as impossibilities. They were mocked, ignored, dismissed. Until they weren't. This is the pattern. It will repeat. You can either be a spectator, or you can be the one who redefines what's possible. The reality is, most limits are self-imposed. They are artifacts of outdated assumptions or broken models. If you can identify those and engineer your way through them, you're no longer bound by the same rules as everyone else. Your imagination, discipline, and willingness to suffer for the solution become your only real constraints. Not the market, not the critics, not even the failure rate. The best innovators don't ask, "Can it be done?" They ask, "What needs to be true for this to work?" And then they go make it true. You will encounter resistance. Not just technical resistance, but social resistance. People are afraid of big bets. They see audacity as a threat because it forces them to reckon with their own comfort. Your pursuit of the impossible reminds others of their compromise. That's why you can't anchor your ambition in their approval. It must come from somewhere deeper, a commitment to solving something important. Not because it's easy, but precisely because it's hard. When you pursue what others believe is impossible, you position yourself not just to build a company or product, but to shift the trajectory of what humans believe they can achieve. That's how you leave a dent not just in the market, but in history. Comfort is seductive. It's the default state that most systems, businesses, and individuals drift toward unless they deliberately resist. But comfort is not compatible with innovation. Growth doesn't happen in the zone of predictability. It happens at the edge of uncertainty where the stakes are real and the outcomes are unknown. When your life, your company, or your mission begins to prioritize comfort, you stop optimizing for progress. You start optimizing for preservation, and preservation, while it might feel safe, is the slowest form of decline. You don't change the world by doing what's easy. You do it by tolerating discomfort longer than others are willing to. People often misunderstand ambition. They think it's about winning, but ambition, real ambition, is about enduring. It's about waking up every day with a clear sense of what matters, even when it's hard, even when you're tired, and even when it feels like nothing is working. Purpose is what keeps you going when the initial excitement has worn off, and all that remains is the difficult, often boring process of execution. The path of purpose is rarely convenient. It will require you to sacrifice things that others take for granted: sleep, leisure, approval, even stability. You may have to work when others rest, continue when others quit, and believe when no external evidence supports your belief. People who choose comfort will tell you that you're pushing too hard, that you need balance, that you should slow down. They're not wrong for them. But if your goal is to push the frontier of possibility, their advice doesn't apply to your operating system. You are not trying to replicate what exists. You are trying to build something new. That requires a different level of effort, resilience, and clarity. The truth is, building anything meaningful is hard. Very hard. Most people will quit, not because they lack intelligence or talent, but because they hit resistance and interpret it as a sign to stop. You can't do that. Resistance is data. Friction is feedback. It's the universe asking, how much do you actually care about this? The deeper your purpose, the more willing you are to suffer for it. You're not chasing ease, you're chasing impact, and impact demands cost. When purpose is your compass, you don't need motivation, you need systems. You need habits that persist even when your emotional state doesn't cooperate. Motivation is fleeting. Discipline is foundational. Discipline is what separates professionals from amateurs. It's the act of showing up when the results aren't immediate, the recognition isn't coming, and the journey feels endless. If you're only committed when it's convenient, you're not committed. You're interested, and interest is cheap. In a world that increasingly values speed, comfort, and viral success, those who prioritize depth, long-term thinking, and authentic contribution stand out. Purpose has depth. It's rooted in a problem you're obsessed with solving, not a lifestyle you're trying to maintain. If your goal is to do something big, to build something that outlives you, then comfort becomes a liability. It dulls your edge, slows your reflexes, and clouds your judgment. You start playing not to lose instead of playing to win. This doesn't mean you should burn out. It means your North Star is not how good today feels, but how aligned your effort is with what you care about most. Some days will be brutal, that's part of it. But when you know why you're doing something, when the mission is clear, those difficult days aren't setbacks. They're proof that you're in the arena, not sitting in the stands. Most people optimize for ease. They want less resistance, fewer challenges, more predictability. But you, if you're serious, should optimize for value creation. What can you build that didn't exist before? What problem can you solve that others have ignored? What future can you accelerate? That kind of thinking doesn't come from a place of comfort. It comes from tension, from exposure, from staring down difficult questions and engineering your way through them. Purpose is the thing that keeps you grounded when everything around you is uncertain. It's the why behind the what. Without it, every hardship feels like a reason to stop. With it, every hardship becomes part of the process. Purpose gives pain meaning, and when pain has meaning, it becomes fuel, not friction. Comfort might feel good in the moment, but it rarely leads anywhere significant. If you're building something worth building, expect resistance. Embrace it. Purpose will pull you through what comfort would never prepare you for. That's not just a mindset. It's a strategy. Most people think by analogy. They make decisions based on how things have been done before, drawing comparisons, using templates, following precedents. This is a comfortable way to navigate complexity, but it's also deeply limiting. When you think by analogy, you inherit the assumptions, constraints, and flaws of other people's models. You stop questioning the foundation and start iterating on someone else's thinking. But innovation does not live in iteration alone. It lives in reconstruction, in breaking things down to the fundamental truths of physics, logic, and reason, then building up from there. That's first principles thinking. First principles thinking is about reducing problems to their core components, facts that are undeniably true, and discarding everything that is based on convention or tradition. It requires asking the kind of questions that make people uncomfortable. Why does it have to be this way? What are we assuming that might not be true? If we were starting from zero, how would we build this? These are not questions most people are trained to ask. Most people are trained to optimize what already exists. But if your goal is to create breakthrough solutions, you can't start from what exists. You have to start from what's possible. This kind of thinking is not easy. It's cognitively expensive. It demands curiosity, patience, and a willingness to challenge deeply held assumptions. It's far easier to copy what others are doing, dress it up slightly, and call it innovation. But copying is not progress. True progress often looks irrational at first because it diverges from the norm. When you operate from first principles, you give yourself permission to escape inherited boundaries. You begin to see possibilities that no one else is seeing, not because you're smarter, but because you're asking better questions. The reason first principles thinking is so powerful is because it forces clarity. Instead of relying on inherited complexity, it forces you to face the raw materials of a problem. Whether you're designing a battery, writing software, or scaling a company, every problem can be decomposed into elements that are governed by physics, math, human behavior, or basic economics. These elements don't change with trends or opinion. They remain consistent, and if you can identify them, you can work with them like a scientist, not just a strategist. Every breakthrough product, company, or idea that has shifted an industry was born from someone applying first principles. Electric vehicles were dismissed for decades because the conventional wisdom said batteries would never be efficient or affordable enough. That belief was based on outdated assumptions. It wasn't until someone looked at the fundamental chemistry of lithium-ion cells, the supply chain for raw materials, and the mechanics of mass production that it became obvious. The problem wasn't technical impossibility, it was mental laziness. People assumed things couldn't change because they never tried to change them at the atomic level. First principles made that shift possible. When you apply first principles, you don't just solve existing problems, better you redefine the problem entirely. You stop accepting constraints that are arbitrary. You start inventing solutions that are truly original. It's the difference between tweaking a recipe and inventing a new form of cuisine. The former is safe. The latter changes the industry, but to get there, you have to be willing to sit with uncertainty. First principles thinking often gives you no map. You are inventing the map as you go. You won't always have benchmarks. You won't always have validation. What you will have is insight, deep, elemental insight that others miss because they're too busy benchmarking competitors or repeating what worked 5 years ago. Insight is the most valuable currency in a world overloaded with information. To think from first principles also means developing resilience, because the deeper you dig, the more resistance you'll face from people attached to the current model. They'll tell you it's too radical, too costly, too different. But what they mean is it's too unfamiliar. Familiarity feels safe, but safety is the enemy of transformation. If you want to build the future, you must be willing to abandon the frameworks of the past. Not blindly but deliberately through rigorous, independent reasoning. There is no formula for first principles thinking. It's a discipline, a habit, a way of interrogating the world with intensity and precision. The more you practice it, the more you realize how much of what we take for granted is simply tradition masquerading as truth. First principles thinking is not about being contrarian for its own sake. It's about being accurate. It's about reaching truth that others overlook because they stopped asking why. When you learn to think from first principles, you no longer operate at the surface. You operate at the source. And from that depth, you don't just build better answers, you build better questions. That is where real innovation begins. Uncertainty is not the enemy, it's the environment. If you're doing anything worth doing, whether it's building a business, inventing a new technology, or solving a global scale problem, you are operating in ambiguity. There is no instruction manual for the future. There is no playbook for creating something that hasn't been done before. The difference between those who ship real innovation and those who stall in potential is not that one has certainty and the other doesn't. It's that one moves forward anyway. Waiting for clarity is one of the most dangerous habits in any endeavor. The market won't pause for you to feel ready. The competition won't wait for you to be confident. If you hesitate, you lose momentum. If you delay, someone else will figure it out faster. Every day you spend waiting for more data, more permission, or more perfect conditions is a day you're falling behind someone who is already building. Progress is iterative. Understanding is earned through action. You outwork uncertainty by moving forward even when the path isn't fully lit. People tend to confuse action with recklessness, but they're not the same. Acting in uncertainty does not mean acting blindly. It means accepting that no amount of analysis will ever give you a 100% guaranteed outcome. You can prepare, model, forecast, but at some point, the only way to know if something will work is to test it. Launch the prototype, deploy the code, build the engine. Uncertainty cannot be resolved in theory alone. It yields only to experimentation. The most successful people and organizations don't eliminate uncertainty. They build systems that thrive within it. They understand that reality is dynamic. Conditions change, assumptions break, plans evolve. You can't control all variables, but you can control the pace at which you learn. Speed matters. The faster you act, the faster you collect feedback. The faster you get feedback, the faster you improve. Velocity becomes a form of intelligence. It's not about being reckless, it's about being relentless in your iterations. This mindset requires emotional toughness. Uncertainty brings with it fear, doubt, and the discomfort of not knowing. Most people retreat when those feelings arise. They freeze, stall, or shift to safer, clearer tasks. But high performers build a different response. They get comfortable being uncomfortable. They treat uncertainty not as a signal to stop, but as a call to engage, because on the other side of that discomfort is insight. On the other side is a solution that others will never reach because they backed off too early. You have to become addicted to the process, not just the result. Because in uncertainty, results are delayed. Validation is rare. The scoreboard doesn't move for a long time. If you're only in it for applause or metrics, you'll burn out. But if you commit to showing up, executing daily, and letting the work refine you, then the results will eventually compound. Outworking uncertainty is not a sprint. It's sustained endurance powered by vision. The work itself becomes your stability. There is a kind of clarity that comes only from motion. You can't think your way into certainty. You have to build your way into it. With each iteration, you reduce the unknown. With every failed test, you learn something you didn't know before. This process is messy, frustrating, and often nonlinear, but it's the only way real things get built. Great ideas are not perfect plans executed flawlessly. They're rough ideas built under pressure, adjusted in real time, and made great through brute force learning. The world doesn't reward ideas, it rewards outcomes, and outcomes come from action. You don't need to know everything to take the first step. You just need to be willing to act in the face of what you don't know. That's what separates innovators from spectators. Spectators wait until they're confident. Innovators act until they become confident. Confidence is a byproduct of effort, not a prerequisite for it. There will never be a perfect moment. The conditions will never all line up. The information will never be complete. The great myth is that successful people had certainty before they acted. They didn't, they had conviction. And conviction is built through movement, not meditation. You want to gain an edge, outlearn everyone, outfail everyone. Outwork uncertainty to the point where you know your system, your mission, and your market better than anyone else alive. The cost of inaction is invisible but enormous. While you wait for certainty, the future is being claimed by those willing to move without it. If you want to build something extraordinary, don't try to remove uncertainty. Learn to outperform it. Failure is not the opposite of success. It's the process by which success emerges. In a system where the variables are constantly shifting, technology, markets, user behavior, global conditions, your ability to win doesn't depend on avoiding failure, but on how rapidly you can convert failure into understanding. The faster you fail, the faster you acquire feedback. The faster you get feedback, the faster you adapt. That loop, build, test, fail, learn, repeat, is the foundation of innovation. If you're afraid to fail, you're afraid to learn. And if you're afraid to learn, you're not serious about building anything that matters. Most organizations are designed to avoid failure. They create complex decision hierarchies, long planning cycles, and rigid approval processes, all in the name of risk mitigation. But what they're really doing is slowing down their learning. Speed is a competitive advantage in any industry, and speed comes from iteration. Perfection is a false god. You don't need to be perfect. You need to be better and then better again. That kind of progress only happens when you accept that failure is inevitable and you engineer for it. The key is to fail in controlled environments, at low cost and high frequency. Launch the prototype before you're ready. Ship the code that might break. Release the hardware that still has limitations, not recklessly, but aggressively. You learn more in one real-world deployment than in 6 months of hypothetical discussions. A product in the customer's hands, even if imperfect, gives you more data than 100 internal meetings ever could. The lab can only teach you so much. Reality will teach you everything you need if you listen. Failure should be structured. You build systems that reveal flaws early and fast, testing environments that push your models to the edge, feedback loops that reward honesty, not ego. When a failure happens, you don't waste time with blame, you study the root cause. Not just what went wrong, but why it went wrong, and how you can ensure it either doesn't happen again or happens better next time. Failure is only wasteful when it's not analyzed. The best teams treat failure like a lab report. Each one brings them closer to clarity. There's a cultural aspect to this, too. You cannot fail fast in a culture that punishes failure. People will hide mistakes, sugarcoat results, and avoid taking risks altogether. If you want speed and innovation, you need to create an environment where intelligent failure is respected, where people are encouraged to test bold ideas, report what didn't work, and share what they learned. The mindset must shift from fear to experimentation, from perfection to iteration. You don't get to breakthroughs by protecting your ego. You get there by putting your ego aside and putting the mission first. The reason this approach works so well is that the cost of small failures is insignificant compared to the cost of not learning. Every major failure you didn't detect early becomes exponentially more expensive later. Whether it's a product defect, a flawed business model, or a wrong technical assumption, if you fail slow, you fail big. But if you fail fast, you adapt while the cost is still small. Early course correction is always cheaper than late stage recovery. People often underestimate how much resilience is built through failure. It doesn't just sharpen the product, it sharpens the team, it forces better thinking, clearer communication, and stronger systems. It builds anti-fragility, a state where the system improves under pressure instead of breaking down. Companies that have never failed are brittle. The first time they encounter real turbulence, they fall apart. But those who have failed early and often know how to pivot, reinforce, and rebuild with speed, they are tested, they are prepared. Failing fast also creates momentum. It means you are moving, you are testing assumptions, not just theorizing. You are engaging with reality, not hiding from it. Momentum matters more than most people realize. It gives you internal energy, attracts talent, and signals to the market that you are serious. Even your failures become assets, proof that you are working on real problems at real scale. Investors, customers, and collaborators respect execution, not ideas, not intentions, execution, and nothing accelerates execution like rapid cycles of trial and learning. The most important thing is to keep going. Failure is a signal, not a sentence. You adjust, not abandon. You iterate, not retreat. Every failed test is a step closer to the right answer. Every broken system is an invitation to build a better one. You are not here to be cautious. You are here to figure out what's possible. And that means moving fast enough to collide with the unknown, and strong enough to get back up with more knowledge than you had yesterday.